again, and welcome to the third episode of the Worldview series. This video is about values and how they affect our worldviews. Value is, again, just like all concepts, defined in many ways. In this video, the concept of value is defined as the worth or importance of something. This definition is semicircular and doesn't in itself exemplify what constitutes a value. It is, however, for the purposes of this video, sufficient, as it is more inclusive than many other, more limiting definitions of value. Before we begin, let it be clear that the primary purpose of this video is the exploration into the nature of values and the implications of that nature, namely that objective values cannot exist unless we dramatically change what we mean by values. Let's begin with the most important question. Are values objective? If values signify the worth of something, does that something have value beyond opinion? In other words, if something is deemed valuable, is that thing valuable without someone who deems it valuable? Here, in line with the definition of value, I contend that nothing is valuable beyond deeming it valuable by a person. Value is therefore an arbitrary trade of things. We cannot perceive the value of the thing like we can perceive, say, the color of an apple. We also cannot infer the value of a thing as we have no means to measure or even quantify value. For example, if a merchant tells you that their product is worth $50, how can you perceive that yourself from the properties of that product? You in fact cannot. Nothing about the product itself tells you what its objective monetary value should be. The monetary value of a thing is based on the whims of the person who offers it in exchange for money. That person can dictate how much that product costs. When we try to be fair about the monetary value of things, we consider things like supply and demand. We also assess things like, is this product unique or hard to come by? How useful is the product? Is it appealing to us personally? Even if we can guess correctly the monetary value assigned to a product by a seller, that wouldn't mean that the product has value beyond the one it has been assigned to by the seller. That we cannot make objective measurements of values is in itself a devastating argument against the notion that values are objective. But an even stronger objection arises from the incompatibility between objectivity and the nature of values. Now, I want to make a small disclaimer here about the objective existence of something. Many things like depression and anxiety, love, hate, confusion, and so on could be said to exist. These things are not, however, directly perceivable by others, but only by the subjects who experience them themselves. They are in this manner subjective in nature, even though they could be said to exist objectively. This is because they exist objectively within subjects. They don't exist objectively outside subjects, and I contend that this is the nature of the existence of values. This distinction between kinds of objective existences is important because occasionally we confuse the two. To say that objective values exist can mean that values exist independent of subjects, or that values exist objectively. When I speak about objective values in this video, I mean values that exist independent of individual subjects, not values that exist within the world which subjects are a part of. For values to be objective in nature, they must not rely on subjective notions for their existence and character. If objective values exist, then they exist regardless of subjective states. Treating values objectively is to give them the nature of objects that exist outside subjects. From this interpretation, we arrive at the most central problem with the idea that values exist separate from subjects, the epistemic status of values. How exactly do we know anything about these things called values? Did we observe them from a telescope? Did we find them at the bottom of the sea? Did we infer their existence from mathematical formulas? No. The only reason we speak about values is because we value things, and because we hear others speak about and act according to what they value. This is it, really. The existence of values becomes apparent to you only when you realize you prefer some things over other things, like preferring a food or a dating partner over another, or when you witness someone else speak or act in accordance with the idea that they, too, have values. For any of you out there who actually believe that values exist objectively, you have to understand what I just said if you ever hope to understand why some people claim objective values do not exist. To rephrase what I said in the hopes that I can persuade you, the only way we can ever know anything about the nature of values is through subjects. All values we have ever witnessed, in one way or another, in the entire history of humanity, have, without a single exception, been subjective. If something is worth something or important, it means that it is worth something or important to someone. It might seem like this is not a given, but it really is. To say that something can have worth or importance outside subjectivity is equivalent to ascribing mental states to non-living matter. A rock has no values for the same reason it has no anger. It has no mind. If you believe you have even one example of values that have existed outside subjectivity, then please leave a comment about it. I am beyond curious to hear what these values are and how and where they are observable in space-time. Now, if we know about values only through subjects, then what are values really? In line with the definition of values, that they denote the worth or importance of something, we must understand what worth and importance mean. Values reflect the psychological phenomenon known as motivation. Values are an inherent aspect of goal-oriented behavior. For example, the fact that you are motivated to eat to stay alive assigns food survival value to you. If you eat some food because you want to experience the good taste of that food, then it has hedonistic value. If you want to ease your pain by eating food, then the food has clinical value. If you want to sell the food, then it has monetary value. In this way, we can always trace back the motivational roots of any value. To make this case even stronger, I contend that any intentional behavior of any entity is inconceivable if we do not introduce values into the functionality of that behavior. Intentional action can only occur through goal orientation, whether the goal itself is intentional or not. In other words, values make no sense outside a mind, because motivation is a part of behavioral functionality, i.e., purposeful action, which is not something that mindless entities can engage in. For a thing that has no mind, and therefore no motivation, everything is valueless. From the perspective of the mindless, there is no perspective, and therefore nothing either matters nor doesn't matter for them. It is absurd to even speak about something mattering for something that cannot experience anything. Where then could objective values even reside in? If values are derivatives of goal-oriented behavior, then the implication is that only subjects can have values. And if values are inherently a feature of subjective minds, then they cannot be, by definition, objective. A religious connotation within the notion of objective values is probably quite apparent to most of you. This video is admittedly partly inspired by conversations about objective values between apologists and skeptics. Most often, the existence of objective values is inferred from the existence of a deity, but seculars have also attempted to find sources of objective values. In either case, the same problems I highlighted so far apply. Whether it is a secular or a religious thinker, if they advocate for the existence of objective values, then they face the burden to demonstrate where these values reside in, how they are accessible, and how they can be quantified or measured. If values cannot be objectively measured or observed, then the notion that values are purely subjective in nature remains the most likely scenario. It is often said by advocates of objective values based on God that unless God exists, no objective values can exist, and therefore we humans have no moral guidelines. They say that if God doesn't exist, then nothing ultimately matters, leading to a nihilistic worldview. This is a peculiar conclusion, given what we now know about the nature of values. That is, if you agree with me. Even if a powerful entity like a deity has moral standards, it would still have to impose those standards upon us, and they would still be subjective to that deity. We couldn't sense or measure these standards like we do other objective things. Is all meaningless if a powerful father figure isn't here to provide us with meaning? Of course not. Given that people who have values exist, even if these people are not as powerful as some being we can imagine, then values exist objectively. To claim, after understanding this inference, that the universe is meaningless and without value, would be equivalent to asking a rock about the value of things or the purpose of life, instead of turning to beings that are capable of manifesting and understanding value. Most things in the universe are lifeless, but the things that aren't can hold values. Even if values don't reside in some ultimately absolute form that we all have to accept, they exist in us, and we are a part of the universe. It seems fitting, then, to state the following. Even if the whole universe isn't a mind that holds value, minds that hold value exist in the universe. If values exist within the universe, then the universe isn't perfectly value-free. If the universe isn't perfectly value-free, then the universe is not meaningless. Meaning is manifested in and by minds. Minds are a part of the universe. We are minds. Therefore, we are the part of the universe that generates meaning. In other words, without life, and especially us humans, nothing would truly matter. If you stuck around till the very end, thank you. If you enjoy content like this and want to support me, consider subscribing. Stay sane and see you next time.